Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digimon spoilers video. So today we got basically the rest of the cards for BT05 Battle for Omega, or the English version is Battle for Omni spoiled, and this set is definitely looking like it's going to be a really powerful set, and well, let's just go over all of the cards we didn't know before. First up, starting with Gaussmon. So Gaussmon is a red level 3, stat-wise not doing anything too special, but he does have two really interesting abilities. So his first ability is during your turn, all of your other Gaussmon get plus 3000 DP. So that means if you just have a field of Gaussmon, then they're just going to mass buff each other, and for a rookie, that's pretty good. And then he has another really interesting ability where during the opponent's turn, your opponent can't reduce their Digivolution costs. So this just locks them out of trying to reduce their Digivolution costs, so that way they have to pay the full amount, but it doesn't exactly lock them out of gaining memory. So if they are technically reducing their evolution by gaining the memory back, then that's still totally fine. But the fact that purple, green, and black had these rookies that basically shut out the opponent of gaining memory, this kind of shuts them out of being able to reduce their evolution costs. So we are probably going to be seeing this type of ability on a red, blue, and yellow Digimon, but that's just going to be interesting to see how the meta develops because of this. Next up, we have a new Meramon. So this Meramon is a red level 4 Meramon, stat-wise doing nothing too special there. And then he has a very simple when Digivolving ability where one of your other Digimon gets plus 3000 DP for the turn. So this is just okay. If you're trying to go wide, then this really supports a go wide strategy because he needs another Digimon in order to get this buff off. But he's definitely doing something really, really decent if you're able to go wide enough. And it's definitely not a bad ability, it's just not a super spicy one. Next up, we have Dorbyggmon. So Dorbyggmon is a red level 6 Digimon, and stat-wise he's doing nothing too special there for being a red level 6, but he does have a really interesting when attacking ability where you basically get to discard one of your red Digimon cards from your hand and then add that card's DP that you discarded to this Digimon for the turn. So this could be really, really powerful depending on what you want to discard. Red, unfortunately, doesn't exactly have a whole lot of draw power, so I don't exactly know how good this is going to be for the color red, but maybe in some weird mix and match splash deck, this card could be really, really good. But just the fact that red is playing with some self-discarding is definitely really interesting because it could help set up some certain combos that you might not be thinking about. So you could play this with Gallantmon, discard the Gallantmon, and then if you already have a Megidramon on field, then you could utilize it with a Megidramon to revive the Gallantmon when Megidramon dies. So who knows how good this card's actually going to be, but it's definitely really interesting of a card to be playing around with just because of the uniqueness of his ability. Next up, we have Syakuman. So this is the blue Digimon that just locks out the opponent from reducing their Digivolution costs. Next up, we have Gesomon. So Gesomon is a blue level 4 Digimon, and stat-wise, it's nothing we haven't seen before, but the fact that they are just fleshing out some of these value vanillas is definitely really, really interesting because the more different stat lines that we have, the more available options we need based on how the meta is developing and what we want to run. So a card with this type of stat line is really good just because it is a level 4 with a very low play cost. So that way, if you don't have a rookie in your hand, you don't feel super bad about just slamming this on the field to start things going, just because, again, the low play cost makes it very, very easy to play compared to something with a higher play cost. Next up, we have Coelamon. So Coelamon is just going to be blue's a value blocker. I guess I'm just going to label it as a value blocker just because it has a low evo cost. Its DP is okay, but the fact that it is the new blue blocker is really, really good. We already saw that red got theirs, and now blue is getting theirs here as well. I thought they were going to put blues in BT06, but looks like I was wrong, and I'm kind of glad I'm wrong just because these cards are still very, very good, and this is definitely a really important card going forward for the color blue, and this will definitely see a lot of play. play. Next up, we have Neptunemon. So Neptunemon is a blue level 6, and this time he is following the stat line where he has a low evo cost and some slightly lower DP. But this is pretty good because his ability is actually really good for this type of stat line. So he has the nice ability where during the opponent's turn, this Digimon can't be attacked. So the whole idea with this type of a card is you basically build up his stack to be something really powerful, and then you just start swinging right away, and because he can't be attacked into, it really limits the opponent's options on how they want to interact with him, and the fact that you evolved him for 2 just means he's a really good tempo tool for your level 7s, and the fact that he can't be attacked into is just a form of protection, so that way he could stick around even longer, just so you could buy some time until you get to your level 7s. So this is definitely going to be a really interesting card to be playing around with, and I think this is definitely a really spicy card. I don't know exactly how good he's going to be in the grand scheme of things, because in order for this card to be absolutely insane, you do kind of need to build a really solid stack, and usually if you're trying to play like that turbo style, then you're not necessarily focused on having a super good stack, but he's definitely a really interesting card to be thinking about nonetheless. And I do wish he was a little bit spicier, but I definitely think what we have is definitely a really interesting Digimon to be playing around with. Next up, we have Cutemon. So Cutemon is a yellow level 3 Digimon, stat-wise doing nothing too special there, but what is good about her is the fact that she has the ability that we've seen on red and blue, where during your opponent's turn, your opponent can't reduce the Digivolution costs. So again, same thing as all of the others, it's just a pretty interesting card to be playing around with, just because it'll help limit on what the opponent's doing, and that could be really good depending on the matchup. Next up, we have Kotemon. So Kotemon is a pretty solid Digimon considering he is a yellow level 3 Digimon. His stats aren't really anything too special, but he does have a really nice on-play ability where you get to check the top 5 cards of your deck and then add 2 Digimon with either Warrior or Holy Warrior in their type set and add them into your hand, and then the rest go on the bottom. So this is just your classic on-play digger where you're just looking for something specific, and the fact that you get to add 2 Warriors or Holy Warriors is definitely really powerful, especially if you're trying to fit it into that Crusadermon deck, just because you're going to be trying to play more Warriors and Holy Warriors. So I definitely think this is pretty decent. Even if you're not trying to like super focus on Warriors, the fact that this could still search out Holy Warriors is still very relevant for a lot of yellow decks, and is definitely something they might consider playing, considering they have other ways to just play this card, and this is just going to be an overall decent card for yellow going forward. More so for the Crusadermon style decks, but overall just a really solid card. Next up, we have Renamon. So Renamon is a yellow level 3 Digimon, but what is really interesting about her is the fact that she has a play cost of 4 with only 3000 DP. Usually when they increase the play cost, they'll increase the DP, but because she has an on-play ability, that's probably why they didn't increase her DP, and it's not like her play cost that really matters, just because most of the time you're just going to Evo her, and then if you have something to cheat her in for free, then you're just going to bypass the play cost anyway and still get the on-play ability. But her on-play ability is actually pretty decent for being on a level 3 body, where her on-play ability is that you get to give one of your opponent's Digimon security attack -1 until the end of the opponent's next turn. So this is pretty decent at just being able to like pseudo-recover without recovering. It also prevents the opponent for hitting for lethal, so it's definitely really interesting to think how this card could be utilized, and I definitely think that she is going to be a pretty decent card going forward. Next up, we have Cubimon. So Cubimon is a yellow level 4. Stats aren't really doing anything too special, but you don't really care about her stats just because most of the time you're going to want her for her inheritable ability, and her inheritable ability is pretty decent where during your turn, all of your opponent's security Digimon get -1000 DP. So we kind of already saw Sakuyamon be playing around with this type of ability, and obviously being in the Renamon line, this ability is just meant to support Sakuyamon, but it's also pretty good just because Yellow has had a lack in high-powered DP Digimon, and the fact that this debuffs the opponent's security Digimon, so it makes hitting their security that much easier, is still something a lot of Yellow decks could potentially be thinking about, especially since Yellow doesn't have like super great inheritables on their lower levels. It definitely makes this card really interesting for yellow to be playing around with. But again, the obvious and intended synergy is supposed to be with Sakuyamon, so that way you just have a massive debuff on the opponent's security Digimon, and yeah, that's just pretty decent of a strategy. Next up, we have Taomon. So Taomon is a yellow level 5 Digimon. Stats aren't doing anything too special, but second verse, same as the first. This is basically just doing the same thing that Cubimon was doing, where you're really playing this for the inheritable effect to debuff the opponent's security Digimon. So fully stacked up with Sakuyamon, it's going to be a huge debuff, but again, just having the same type of ability on different levels allows you to customize your deck to fit where you want this type of ability to be slotted in, and I definitely like the redundancy in the abilities because, again, pair them up together and it's a bigger debuff, or you could play around with one or the other and still not feel bad just because the ability is still pretty decent. Next up, we have a new Floramon. So Floramon isn't really doing anything too special for a level 3 green Digimon. We've kind of already seen the stat line before, so again, just nothing special there. Next up, we have Kiwimon. So Kiwimon is a level 4 green Digimon. Stat-wise, isn't doing anything too special, but what is special about the card is the fact that it has a really nice on-play ability. So its on-play ability is you get to check the top 3 cards of your deck and then add all Digimon with the Digizorption ability from among them into your hand, and then the rest go onto the bottom. So usually this type of ability is placed on a level 3, and it's really interesting at the fact that it's placed on a level 4, and it's looking for Digizorption, which we really haven't seen like a whole lot of Digizorption synergy cards come out in the set. Like, we did see a new Argamon, but that's kind of it. And the fact that one of them did get nerfed definitely makes this card a little bit worse because it just has one less card to search for. But on the inverse side, it's still searching for cards with that ability, and that's still pretty good if you're trying to play into like the Saruspon style of deck. And it's still getting you a body, and it's not like paying 4 versus 3 is that huge of a difference, depending on how the board state is. So I definitely think this is going to be a really interesting card for green to be playing around with if you're playing around with the Digizorption ability. Next up, we have Garbagemon. So Garbagemon is a green level 5 Digimon, and it's just another value vanilla. Nothing really too special there. Next up, we have Daramon. So Daramon is a pretty solid green level 5 Digimon. Stat-wise, he isn't doing anything too special, but what is special is the fact that he has a really nice ability of during your turn, for each of your other suspended Digimon you have in play, this Digimon gets plus 2000 DP. So he's just DP boosting himself, which is pretty good for green overall, and green already is playing with like the Digizorption ability, so that's kind of like his intended synergy is you just use Digizorption to rest some of your other Digimon to pay for the cost to make it easier to go into your higher levels, and then this card will reward you for increasing his own DP for all of your rested Digimon. The inverse side of the ability is you could just swing with your Digimon to get them rested or use the blocker ability, so he has a whole bunch of different and weird applications on how to utilize the card, and I definitely think he's going to be a really interesting card. I just don't know how much play he's actually going to see, considering there's just so many other better things that green wants to be doing. But you could use this card in some weird ways to try to make a really interesting deck out of him. Next up, we have Rosemon. So this is another new form of Rosemon, and stat-wise, this Rosemon isn't doing anything too special, but what is nice about the card is the fact that she has the main ability of Digiburst 3. So for trashing 3 of this card's evolution, you get the ability where all of your Digimon with Digiburst gain security attack +1 for the turn. So this just is playing around with the whole Digiburst strategy, and the fact that green has so many different Digibursts means that you could use this ability to just mass buff a whole bunch of different Digimon, and I think it's a really interesting ability. I don't know exactly how good it's going to be, considering we already have something similar to this with the promo Grand Kawagamon. But it's still pretty interesting to think about just because green has so many different Digiburst Digimon that you could really just use this ability in some very devastating ways to just break all of the opponent's security relatively quickly. But again, I don't know exactly how good this is going to be in the long run, just because green has so many other cards that they could utilize that this is just another tool to think about for green. Next up, we have Monotamon. So Monotamon is a pretty decent black level 3. Stat-wise, it's not really doing anything too special, but it does have two really interesting abilities. So its first ability is an on-play ability where you just get a look at the top card of your deck. So that's kind of a really interesting ability considering Black has slowly been playing with looking at the top cards of your deck. Usually it tries to rearrange them, but the fact that you just get to look at the top card of the deck still gives you some information on how you want to make some of your plays and what you're trying to go into and what you're going to be getting. And that's still just good information to have. And then on top of which, you get a nice on deletion ability where you get to check the top 3 cards of your deck, and then you could play one Monotamon from among them for free, and then the rest go to the bottom. So this card just allows you to see if you want to use this card more aggressively. You could use this in combination with the Black Izzy to just help rearrange the top cards of your deck, so that way you could decide when you want to be aggressive with this card. But it's definitely a really weird and interesting card, and the fact that it replaces itself kind of fits into like the whole D-Brigade kind of style of deck, where like you're just going to try to figure out ways for it to replace itself and look at the top cards of your deck consistently, so that way you could decide how and when you want to aggro. So it's definitely a really weird card, and I definitely think it's going to be a really interesting card to play. I don't know how good it's going to be in the grand scheme of things, but it's here and it's fine. So speaking of D-Brigade, next we have another Commandramon. So this time, this version of Commandramon has a play cost of 4 and 2000 DP, but what's really interesting about the card is the fact that he has the blocker ability with no downside to attacking. So he's kind of following similar style to the starter deck Agumon, except this time he has a higher play cost, but most of the time you're just going to try to cheat him in for free off of the other Commandramon's ability from BT04 or some of the other D-Brigade stuff from BT04, so that's like a really good synergy there. On top of which, he does have an Evo cost of 0, so if you do just Evo into him, you don't feel bad either way. But the fact that he is a blocker that can attack is really, really nice, and he'll definitely be seeing a whole lot of play in the D-Brigade deck, just because the D-Brigade deck, again, is just trying to spam out Commandramon. And the fact that if you have a Commandramon on the field or something that could play Commandramons, then just having a surprise blocker coming out of your deck is definitely really, really nice to think about. Next up, we have Mechanorimon. So this is a pretty interesting black level 4 Digimon. Stat-wise is actually pretty decent, just because for a play cost of 4, you have 6000 DP, but the trade-off is that you do evolve for 3 instead of 2. So this is a card you're definitely going to want to just play from your hand more often than you're going to want to try to Digivolve, just because the play cost and evolution cost aren't super far apart. But what's really good about this card is it has 3 abilities. So its first ability is it has blocker. And then its second ability is that this Digimon can't attack. So what makes this card a very, very powerful blocker outside of its low play cost and high DP is the fact that it has a really nice third ability where during your opponent's turn, when this Digimon deletes an opponent's Digimon and survives the battle, then you get to unsuspend it. So the whole idea behind this ability is usually Rush style decks, the best way to get around their blockers is just line up more attacks than they have blockers, and this kind of helps mitigate that type of play where you just have this card sitting on the field, and then if he deletes one of the opponent's Digimon by battle because, you know, he blocked, then you get to unsuspend him, and basically he just tries to wall out a lot of those aggressive style of decks, especially if he's just bigger than a lot of the Digimon that the opponent are playing with. So I definitely think this is going to be a pretty powerful Digimon for Black to be playing around with, not only just for Black blockers, but just as a good splash tech card for a whole bunch of other Black decks, just because he is a very, very powerful blocker. Next up, we have Black Gaugamon. So this is a black level 4 Digimon. Stat-wise isn't doing anything too special, but what is really nice about the card is the fact that he has a good inheritable ability. So his inheritable ability is during your turn. While this Digimon has Reboot, it gains Jamming. So we've seen this type of ability before on Greymon all the way back in BT02, and I definitely think having the redundancy in the ability so that way you could see the ability more is definitely really, really powerful, because like a good part of the Black blockers strategy is to try to like formulate a Reboot Jammer with blocker. and try to just chip away at the opponent's security as safely as possible. And having multiple instances of this ability just makes it even easier to see it, so that way you could form that type of Digimon that much easier. So I think this is going to be a pretty decent card to be playing around with. Next up, we have Black Mach Galgamon. So Black Mach Galgamon is a black level 5 Digimon. Stats aren't doing anything too special, but he does have an innate ability and an inheritable ability. So his innate ability is he just has Reboot. So this is already pretty decent just because we already saw with the previous card, Black Galgamon, then he's going to give the Digimon with Reboot jamming, so there's kind of the intended synergy there. And then on top of which, he also has an inheritable ability, where during your turn, while this Digimon has Reboot, it also gains plus 2000 DP. So I definitely think this is going to be an interesting card. I just don't know how good this card is going to be as compared to his contemporary, which is all the way back in BT02 with Metal Greymon, because these two cards are very, very similar. But regardless, I definitely think it's still a pretty decent card to have overall. Next up, we have Pillowmon. So Pillowmon is just a purple level 3 Digimon. Stat-wise, it's doing absolutely nothing special, and it's a vanilla card, so on top of doing nothing special stat-wise, it's just not doing anything special ability-wise either. Next up, we have Troopmon. So Troopmon is a purple level 4 Digimon. Stat-wise, it is on the weaker side compared to a lot of other level 4 Digimon that we have for purple, but it does have a really interesting on delete effect where you get to play one Troopmon from your hand for free. And again, purple has some decent amount of card draw. Purple has a whole bunch of ways that they want to delete the Digimon, and I guess the low DP kind of like ties into the fact that you want to swing with this, have it delete itself, and then just be able to play another Troopmon for free is kind of like the whole intended purpose of the card. But I think it's still just overall a really interesting card to be playing around with, and purple does have a decent amount of card draw, so it's not like it's going to be impossible to set up just a Troopmon after Troopmon after Troopmon, and I think it's going to be a pretty decent card. I just don't think it's going to be seeing that much play, considering, again, purple is a very powerful color with some already very powerful tools, and I just don't know if purple is going to be playing around with it. It's still a decent ability to have, I just, again, don't know if this is what purple really wants or if it is what purple really needs. Next up, we have Musyamon. So Musyamon is a pretty solid purple level 4 Digimon just because it has the jamming ability. So we've seen this type of a card all the way back in BT01 where there was just a line of Digimon with this exact same stat line where it's just 4 to play, 2 to evolve, 4000 DP jamming. Like, a lot of the other colors have this type of Digimon, and purple finally gets theirs, and I think this is still pretty decent for purple to be playing around with, just because purple have so many ways of rezzing their Digimon that you don't necessarily care if this lives or dies through the opponent's card effects, and just him having jamming can present a lot of extra pressure onto the opponent, and purple does kind of have their own version of Rookie Rush, so maybe this could go into that. So I think this card's going to be pretty interesting to be playing around with, and I definitely don't think it's a bad card. It just feels a little late to the party. Next up, we have Vajramon. So Vajramon is a purple level 5 Digimon, and its stats that we've already seen before in cards like Bastimon and Lavagaratimon, so it's not anything too surprising that purple's finally getting theirs here, but it's always nice to see it just because it does have some relatively high DP, and it has an Evo cost of 2, which definitely makes it a very playable card that purple might want to be considering to play with, just because it helps you turbo into your higher levels that much more efficiently, and you still have a very powerful body to be playing around with on top of that. Next up, we have Jokermon. So Jokermon is a purple level 5 Digimon. Stats isn't anything too special, but what is nice is the fact that it has an on-delete ability where you get to play one level 3 purple Digimon from your trash for free, and then you do not get its on-play effects. So we've kind of already seen just purple play around with Rez so much that this kind of feels like a little version of the promo Venom Myotismon, except that allows you to choose a level 4 or below, and and this is just a level 3. But regardless, it's still really nice to have just to sit on, just because if the opponent's trying to stop you from going up into your higher levels, then you're still going to end up with something. So I definitely think that this is going to be a pretty decent card for purple to be playing around with, just because whether you get its ability off or not doesn't really matter. It's the fact that he just has the ability to be able to replace himself, gives you a little bit of extra protection and insurance when trying to digivolve up into your higher levels. Next up, we have Rowdy Rocker. So Rowdy Rocker is a red option card. It costs 2 to play, and it has a very unique ability. So its main ability is you basically get to place one red level 4 or lower Digimon from your hand underneath one of your Digimon as a Digivolution source. And then if you do, you get to draw 2 cards. So not only is it just drawing you cards for putting a card from your hand into the evolution stack of a Digimon, but it's also increasing the evolution stack of a Digimon, which we haven't really seen a whole lot of before. Like, we've seen green play a tiny bit around with this idea, and the fact that red is also playing around with this idea is definitely really interesting to think about, just because, like, if you look all the way back at the starter deck cards and BT01 cards, they kind of want you to have a decently large evolution stack, so this just helps you build to that evolution stack to get those abilities off even easier, and that's just something really nice to be thinking about, just because all the way back at the beginning of the game, those cards still can see play with this card. And then on top of which, this has the nice security ability of adding itself to your hand, so that way you could decide when you want to use this. So I definitely think this is a really unique option card, and I don't know how much play this is going to be seeing, but it's definitely really nice to have this type of card, just because of how unique it is. Next up, we have Meteor Shower. So Meteor Shower is a yellow option card. It costs 3 to play and has the really nice main ability of you get to play one yellow Digimon with Starmon in its name from your hand for free, and its security effect is activating its main effect. This is a really decent card to just help play them, and this could target any Starmon, so like if we get even more powerful Starmons in the future, then this card is definitely one to look out for. But based on what we currently have, it's still pretty decent, just because it allows you to just play those higher level Starmons basically for 3. And then on top of which, just being able to play Digimon on the opponent's turn through its security effect is also really, really huge, just because it'll add a body on board and create so much extra pressure onto the opponent and allows you to push even farther and do even more crazier things, just because you have that body on board. So I think this is a pretty decent card, and I think if we get more Starmons, then this card is going to get even better in the future. Next, we have You Can't Actually Fly. So this is a green option card. It costs 3 to play, and it has the main ability of suspending one of your opponent's Digimon. Then, if your opponent has a level 7 Digimon in play, you get to trash the top card of their security stack. So this is really, really powerful, just because the rest ability is already very nice. It's something that green already likes to do. And on top of which, just having the ability to basically burn the opponent's security if they're playing with level 7s is definitely really, really nice also, just because level 7s are a little bit hard to deal with. And this is a good, like, in quotation marks, punishment for them playing their level 7s. And it's definitely a way to help you get back into the game, because once a level 7 hits the field, unless you have a level 7 or an effective way of removing the level 7, it's going to be very, very hard for you to deal with, and this is definitely a really powerful card for you to try to aggro them out, just because they are playing a level 7 and you might not have one. So I definitely think that first part of the ability is really, really nice, and then it has the security ability of adding this card to your hand. I wish its security ability was just a tiny bit better, but given how good the main ability could be, is still very, very relevant, and I think this card is definitely going to be a really interesting card to see if green actually wants to be playing around with it or not, just because green already could tempo up into its higher levels more efficiently than a lot of the other colors. Even with the nerfs, it slowed it down a little bit, but it didn't completely neuter the color. So I don't know how good this card actually is going to be, just because green, again, can tempo up faster and get into those higher levels, so that way you could start controlling the opponent's field, so that way they might not even get a level 7. But this is really good for like a Rookie Rush style deck, where you just include this card just to try to burn the opponent 1, just because you won't be interacting with their Digimon very often, and it's very easy for them to get into a level 7 and just sit on that for the rest of the game. So it definitely is a weird card that has a whole bunch of different applications depending on how you want to look at it, and I definitely think this is going to be a pretty interesting card to be looking out for. And then the last card that we got spoiled for the rest of the set is going to be Demonic Disaster. So this is a purple option card that costs 1 to play, so it's already looking to be pretty decent. And then its main ability is you get to delete one of your Digimon to unsuspend one of your purple Digimon. So this is really, really powerful just because it's a really cheap sack outlet card, so that way you could trigger a lot of your on-delete abilities, and then on top of which it also allows you to try to aggro even more just because you get to unsuspend one of your purple Digimon. So you could pair this up with like purple Metal Garurumon to basically just act like a Were-Garurumon's ability for another one-time use, and then purple Metal Garurumon's ability on attack will let you res something again, so there's like some really good applications to that as well. You could use this obviously in Chaos Gallantmon to trigger his abilities, so this is just a really powerful card to be playing with just for that ability. And then on top of which, it even has a pretty decent security ability where you get to play a level 3 purple Digimon from your trash for free, and then you don't get its on-play abilities. So it's basically just a Night Raid in security, and then it is a one-time use Were-Garurumon effect in your hand. And I think that's a pretty decent of a card to be playing around with overall, just because it has a whole bunch of high utility and powerful uses. So that's all of the cards that we missed out on in BT05, and I definitely think BT05 is going to be a really powerful set just because it has a whole bunch of very powerful cards, not only for creating new decks, but for current and existing decks, and I think this set is going to be a really powerful set, and I'm definitely looking forward to see how the meta shakes up and develops because of this set. So that's all I really have for this video. As always, feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.